2 years ago, we released over 200 of these little guys. Water voles. You know, they're sometimes called water rats. These small semi-aquatic rodents have huge impacts to their ecosystems. And we've discovered just how impactful they can be to not only their environment, but also I discovered what they can do to the end of a finger. Oh, Jesus.
Did it bite?
Did it bite? Blood straight away through the gloves.
Oh God, that is horrible.
So I've been a part of this project now for a few years, and it was actually one of the first Mossy Earth projects which I filmed, and it's all about returning this endangered species back to Britain's waterways. And in the UK, they've declined massively. Over the past 80 years, we've lost more than 95% of them. It's been one of the most serious declines of any British mammal. It's been a lethal combination of intensified agricultural practices, habitat loss, and the introduction of a non-native predatory species. And today, we're slowly seeing the steady return of this species thanks to organisations like Mossy Earth, who have funded this entire project. But before I tell you more about how you can get involved with this project, I want to bring you up to speed with the story so far. So water voles are semi-aquatic rodents. They live in waterways, they live in ditches, they live in streams, they live in ponds, wetlands, any kind of wetland habitat, that is where you should find them. And as you'll find out, water voles can be great explorers. They can expand across this habitat looking for new territory, and they also eat a huge diversity of different plant species. Now, something really important to know about voles is they like to poop in the same area. So it's actually really easy to find them because you find these piles of poop. These are otherwise known as latrines, and they use them to signify boundaries of their territory. And at the edges of these watercourses along the banks of the rivers, this is where voles will dig their burrows. Here, this is where they sleep, this is where they find shelter, raise their young, crucially hide from predators. Because you see, voles, they really don't live that long in the wild. They'll be lucky to reach a year. Because of this, they've evolved to have multiple litters in a year, and young can be sexually mature just after a few weeks. And given this ability to multiply rapidly, it kind of makes you ask the question, how have they declined so severely here in the UK? Well, food shortages after the war meant that much of our land was converted to arable fields. It was converted to grazing pasture, and we had to produce food. And what this meant for, our wetlands, they were drained, and for our rivers, they were pinched out of their natural flows. And really, over the past 80 years, this intensification, this industrialization of agriculture has only really become more sophisticated and more efficient at producing greater yields. And really, what's happened is alongside this progression in agriculture, we've seen the downfall of Britain's ecology. I don't know if you can even call it a progression in agriculture if that's what's happened to our landscapes. And during the 1960s, another key element came into play, which made survival for the voles even harder. American mink, who were brought over and they were farmed for their fur, they got loose and they got established out into the countryside, and now they're pretty much everywhere in Britain. And they really are a water vole's worst nightmare. Evolving with their natural predators, water voles, although not entirely cunning in their defense, they were able to get away sometimes and defend themselves, whether if they're escaping into water or, crucially, finding refuge in their burrows. But the thing about American mink is that they are not only semi-aquatic, they're great swimmers, they're also able to get inside a water vole's burrows. And when this happens, they're able to wipe out entire populations in no time at all. You know, it certainly is a depressing story. It seems to be a very similar pattern of emerging across all habitats and species here in the UK. But I think what we can take out of this is hope, because the water vole was able to hold on. And it's organisations like Mossy Earth who are able to build on this hope. They're able to build on this resilience and try and get these creatures back out into the landscape. And in case you're wondering, Mossy Earth run a membership subscription which anybody can be a part of. It's how this project, which you're about to learn about in just a minute, has been funded. And they don't just do water voles, they do all manner of really interesting and impactful projects which are now all over the world, and it's all funded by this membership. And I've been working with Mossy Earth now for the past few years. I've got to go and film and see a lot of the projects firsthand, and I can tell you, as an individual, it can sometimes feel a little bit bleak, can't it? It can sometimes feel like we can't contribute enough as individuals. Well, this membership is really one way of doing just that. If you want to check it out, I'll leave a link to it down in the comments. And this particular Mossy Earth project is now 2 years on. It's been 2 years since the first release of water voles here at Truller's Back Farm, a small holding in Cornwall which has been entirely given back to nature and really is in the perfect location to reintroduce water voles. So Mossy partnered up with Kerno Conservation, and we'll be catching up with David in just a minute, but it was he and the Kerno team who identified this opportunity to release them here. Conditions here on the farm are perfect, as is the wider landscape too. There's a good diversity of watercourses, all well vegetated, and crucially, there's no mink. And at the time of this first reintroduction, you know, there was a real buzz. There were many members of the local community there. There was like a bunch of like TV crews there reporting on the story. You know, it was really significant because it was one of the first reintroductions of water voles to Cornwall. And the voles came from the Derek Gow consultancy, who specialise in water vole conservation and rewilding, and ensured that things went off without a hitch. The release included both hard releases, which were by hand directly into the water, and soft releases through these cages, which allowed the voles to leave in their own time. And it was during these releases that I discovered exactly what a vole could do to the end of your finger. I think it's this one. There's a bit of a scar there. It's still so numb.
Oh God, that is horrible.
That's brutal. That is proper blood. Do you want to go and... We actually got a first aid kit if you
Yeah,
want
I
to
mean,
wash up and sort that out.
I think so. We definitely made it away with a memento. Should probably go and clean this now. And the following year, last summer, it was time to follow up with more voles. The day followed a similar process, although there were less TV crews, and although proud of my water vole scar, I wasn't going to try and hold one again. And at this stage of the project, we just really wanted to know how the first water vole had fared, and really crucially, had mink shown up.
So if we look round the edges of it, there might be, there's like a few water vole droppings on the corner.
Yeah.
And they use those, they just use these to feed on, I think, and they just do droppings. But this leaves footprints. So if we get a mink in here, we can tell by the footprints, and actually you can see water voles have been scraping on here as well. So, but there's no mink prints, which are much bigger.
Camera traps have also been used around the project area too, and they picked up some shots of the voles in action. Through this, we were able to catch glimpses of them, but the best signs of them are the little poop piles and burrows, which we'll get more into in just a minute. And in order to maximise vole reintroduction volume, within these soft release cages, there were some mating pairs. So the hope was that they would be giving a week to really pair up and, you know, do what voles do best. And hopefully we'd be sending out females with babies in her tummy, and then, you know, you're instantly putting out 5, 6 more voles into the landscape.
So these ones that say 2, they're adult pairs from last year. So they paired last year and they had babies, so they could potentially have babies, but we're making new pairs today. So the boxes that are further at the back, there's ones, and then they'll go in with a female or a male and make a new pair, which is quite nice because when you go through the pens at work to bring in the youngsters, you can find like really tiny ones, and then you can find ones that are like this big and fuzzy. They're really cute.
Oh wow.
Very cute. So when they're born, they're bold, like little pink things, we call them pinkies, and then they turn into these kind of like little fuzzy things that kind of go darker as they get fluff, and then they turn into tids, so like a tiny version of a vole, which is like this.
Tids.
Very cute.
That's your term, is it?
Yeah, tids.
Yeah. Pinkies and tids.
Pinkies, then fuzzies, then tids, and then it turns into a juve. Then a sub-adult, then an adult.
So knowing that the original voles were doing really well and we just released a whole bunch more, we were hoping that the population would only continue to grow stronger. And a year on, it really had. I recently went back to catch up with David, and it was astonishing to hear how the voles had spread.
We know that they're here. We've got more signs of them here than we've had the previous 2 years. So every year they're getting more here, and they're also, we've found signs of them both up near the source, which is about 2 kilometres away, and also down to near where it goes tidal, which is about 6 kilometres downstream.
Yeah.
So they're spread out along the entire length. Yeah, they just seem to
Explode. Well, that's what
population. I think they're just supposed to be here. You know,
Yeah.
that's the thing. They are. This is exactly the right habitat for them.
And there's no pressures here. There's no mink.
There's no mink, and that's the key as well, because there are predators like herons and otters and stoats and weasels and things like that, but they will have evolved with those.
Yes.
Whereas they won't have evolved with mink. So if mink were here, that would be a problem.
That would be a real issue, yeah.
This is where, this used to be flag iris, that's not flag iris. But last year it was like this patch of flag iris, and the water voles used to come in. We had a camera trap. The water voles used to come in, and they would dive down and pluck out the new shoots from the bottom, and they would eat it's like a little bulb at the end. There's obviously lots of nutrients in there, and they'd do that and eat it. But now what's happened is they did it so much that the flag iris has disappeared and something else is growing there. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's not the same plant. So they're kind of changing the environment just in the way they're feeding, basically.
So water voles have to eat up to 80% of their own weight every single day in order to stay healthy. And you know, because of this, they're not too picky about the plants which they eat. An individual vole has been recorded to eat over 220 different species of plants. Now, when you're considering just one vole, this might not have a big impact, but we know for a fact that their voles are very abundant when they're able to spread and be healthy. So think about the impact that potentially hundreds and thousands of voles could be having to the vegetative structure and species makeup along waterways. It's potentially huge. So beneath the plants, in the soils, they dig their burrows. Now they can have entry and exit points on top of the banks and also in the sides of the banks as well. A lot of the time, these tunnels, they go underwater and they create U-bends. So like if you're a predator and you come in one end, you're going to be confronted by water and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. So then they have to come back out. These tunnels can be really quite sophisticated. Containing areas for sleeping and raising young. They also have larder areas where they can store food. They line the walls of this with dried vegetation, and in like quite heavy clay soils. These burrows are able to last for decades, with new voles, new generations of voles coming in and expanding on these burrows. And these burrowing networks can be used by other animals too, so other small mammals, insects, reptiles and amphibians. And what can also happen is after a while they can completely collapse into the river, and this can completely alter and change the flow of the water too. Really, the other thing that voles bring to an ecosystem is, well, they bring dinner.
A couple of months after the first release, I saw a heron with the water vole flying off.
Oh really? In its mouth?
In its mouth. So there was mixed feelings when I saw that. And there was very often herons here, so they'll definitely be feeding herons. I've also seen a sparrowhawk with one on this island over here.
Well, unfortunately, that's their role in the ecosystem. They form that base to the trophic pyramid, right?
100%. Well, if you imagine, and they have to be eaten, because otherwise, if you look at the sort of maths of, say, we released 100, say 50 were females, and they have 4 litters a year, and in those 4 litters a year, they have 5 or 6 young. But then when you think that those young also become sexually mature at probably 3 or 4 weeks old, so they can, the ones born early in the year are reproducing that year as well. You can imagine the amount of numbers of water voles that you would have. But they take all this energy, you know, they live in this niche around the edge of ponds, so they'll take all that energy into the food chain and sort of pass it up. So you should theoretically get, you know, increase in reproductive success for all these animals like herons and sparrowhawks and otters and barn owls.
And it really has been quite wonderful coming back here, having followed this project from the start and now knowing that the voles are doing not only really well here, but further down the stream as well. That's really cool. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then please do subscribe. If you want to keep watching the channel, check out the video that's on the screen now. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Live curious.